Hello and welcome to my first watercolour tutorial. The subject will be this colourful sunrise over a marshland. Mainly the wet in wet technique will be used for the sky, and once the sky and water reflections are dry, we'll paint over that with the darker foreground to bring out the contrast, and that will enhance the effect of the sunlight. The paper I'm using is 100% cotton watercolour paper, 140 pounds in weight, and it's this particular brand is Arches, but there are lots of alternatives, of course. I don't pre-stretch the paper, it's just taped dry to a board. I use frog tape, which is a strong masking tape, and the board is tilted at about 10-15 degrees to allow the water to gravitate towards the bottom of the painting as we're creating the wet and wet technique. This is the sketch I started with, a simple composition S shape to lead the eye around the painting. The area here that I've circled, I'll try and keep that white paper because that is the brightest white that you can achieve with watercolour, is the actual underlying paper. So even though I'm painting wet in wet, I'll try to make sure that no paint gets into that area. And if there does, then we would just dab it out with a tissue. One other thing to note about the composition is that the horizon line is below the centre of the line of the paper, so that there's a greater proportion of the paper occupied by the sky, because that is the principal element of the painting. And it's worth bearing in mind that it creates more interesting paintings if for a landscape, if the horizon line isn't exactly central. So some paintings you may want to emphasize the land, in which case have a higher horizon line. Others, like this one, it's emphasizing the sky, but it just gives that asymmetry is important to create interest in a painting rather than having it divided exactly down the middle. So I've just drawn some simple sketch of where the water and grasses will be. No need to draw the clouds, they will just happen naturally as we add the paint onto the wet surface. So I'm just wetting the paper all over to create a wet background that we can then drop the paint onto. A very simple sketch of laying out where the water reflection is going to be, where the land's going to be. I'm using the side of the brush to try and give it a more randomized effect. In this case, it's a round brush with a fine point, but again, any brush used on its side or a sort of mop brush would be equally good. The key really is to keep a variation in the tone and the color. Leave white gaps, creates more interest. With the paper being wet, the colors will merge into one another anyway. One of the techniques to bear in mind if you are going to create a sort of yellowy, yellow colors around the sun for a sunset or a sunrise, in order to avoid creating any greens, is to put some red as a sort of buffer color between the blue and the yellow. So here in this sky, you'll see me applying some reds and oranges between the blue, and then eventually when we get down to the yellow around the sun, we can be confident that there's not going to be any green patches appearing. So just working down from the top of the sky, adding the more reds, oranges, yellow, the particular blues and reds, etc. Actual colors are not that important, so whatever you've got that you're happy with, um, because there's no specific correct color. I mean, it's a sunrise. It could be any variety. So really, the point is to try and create some harmony between the different colors. When it comes to the greens, I will be using a mixture of the blues and yellows that I've already used to retain the harmony across the painting. It's a good idea to perhaps use no more than 4 different colors, maybe 5 different colors in this type of painting to create, to avoid having too many competing hues and tones of different colors. Once the paper dries, the colors will look a lot lighter. And so what I'm going to do here is re-wet the paper gently with a soft mop brush, clear water, and providing it's completely dry, then you can do this without disturbing the paint that you've already put down. So what we'll do is we'll go back in, and once the paper is wet, it won't leave any hard edges, and it enables us to retouch the sky. It needs to be a bit darker in places. And this is something you can always remember with any watercolor that you're painting. If you do have to leave it for whatever reason, because you just only have a limited time and you're not doing it all in one session, you can just re-wet the paper and start again with the soft colors mixing. And this type of sky is just one of many, many types of skies one can paint. In terms of this particular one, I'm using a wet and wet technique, so it's all very soft edges, all merging into one another. Other skies one can paint wet on dry, so that you get sharp, spiky edges for the clouds, for example. And I'll be developing some tutorials to look at skies like that and other types of skies in the coming weeks. As we move down towards the horizon, I'm adding more reds, oranges, yellows, because it's a sunrise, so there's going to be more yellow in the sky around the horizon. The upper skies are darker, maybe clouds or higher blues in the upper atmosphere. When you're painting a sky like this, obviously it's not possible to paint exactly how the clouds would look from a reference photo. So it's just a question of giving a general feel of the way the colors change as you come down from the upper sky down towards the horizon. Now that the paper's dry, we can add the grasses and the banks of the marsh. Because we're painting onto dry paper, there'll be crisp, hard edges, And this is a nice contrast with the soft clouds above, which were created using wet in wet effect. The darker edges will help to give contrast and bring out the light in the sky and the water. As I've previously mentioned, I'm using a mixture of the blues and yellows that I've already used to create the greens. This is generally quite a good idea because that enables us to retain colour harmony across the painting. It is possible, of course, to use different green, say a pre-made green like a sap green or hooker's green, olive green, but they might jar a little bit. They may not look quite so in keeping with the colours that are already there. So it's often a good idea to limit your palette to maybe 3, 4, 5 colours and reuse those to create other tertiary colours that you can, so you can retain the colour harmony. The simple sketch that I did earlier is just following it vaguely to retain the sort of S-shaped composition of the river, or the water at least, as it snakes through the grasses towards the sunlight. And that helps the viewer's eye just to travel along the bank and then out towards the horizon to the focal point, which in this case is the sunshine. So I'm just adding in more darker tones to create a textural effect of the grasses, and this is they're going in wet so they merge and create a sort of soft sense of shadows in the grass. The longer reeds, I'm using a sword liner brush, which has got a very fine point, but any thin brush like a rigger would be fine, just to give some texture and create some sense of the land and the grasses against the lighter water. So some dark strokes of the reeds offset that nicely. As well as using a rigger or a sword liner for those reeds, I did use a palette knife to scrape out some of the grass effects in the foreground. Unfortunately, it didn't come out terribly well on the video. But if one scratches away with either a scalpel or a point of a palette knife to just create some lighter streaks in the paint, that's quite an effective way of adding some texture to the foreground grasses. And you'll see that as we add more darks, the light really starts to become more prominent. This is something to remember with watercolor is in general we work from light to dark because we can't paint over a darker tone with a lighter one in watercolor, unlike acrylics or oils where you can paint light over dark. So, and it's as we add the dark that the light really starts to shine through. And they often say in watercolors there's no light without dark. So in order to really give the sense of luminosity, it's important to have some dark tones set against the lightest ones to really accentuate the light. In this particular case, with a sunrise, dark trees, dark ground against the lighter clouds and the sunrise is a very effective way of bringing out this luminosity. And again, as I was painting this, as I haven't done it all in one session, the paper's dried out. I might have returned to this a few hours later. So now I'm re-wetting the foreground so that we can add those darker tones for grasses without creating hard edges. Now, on some occasions, obviously you want hard edges, so it's not necessary to re-wet, but in this case, I'm still working on the tones of the grass. Had I done it all in one session, then I wouldn't have needed to re-wet it. But again, it's a useful thing to bear in mind is that if you revisit your painting after it's dried, clear water, softly applied, let it soak into the paper for a minute or two, and then you can start creating that wet and wet effect again. And here I'm adding in the distant trees, again using just random strokes with the side of a small brush to try and create the feeling of foliage, leaving some gaps for the sky to show through, modulating the colour, so some of it's darker, some of it's lighter. Actually, as I was doing this, I noticed that created a sort of misty effect beneath the distant trees, in between the distant trees and the foreground, which I quite liked. So a happy accident, if you like. So I thought I'd leave that to make it look as though that was some mist rising in the early dawn as the sun rises over the marsh. So I decided that I needed to make the foreground a bit darker, so I briefly re-wet the paper, and I'm now adding in some more darks to accentuate the light in the on the water, and hence in the sky as well. So again, using the same philosophy, once the paper has dried, I'm going to just re-wet it, and then add in the darker tones without causing any hard lines between the new paint going down and the paint that was already on the paper. Because in this case, I wanted to have a softer effect of the darker shadows within the foreground grasses. So that concludes the tutorial, which I hope you've enjoyed. And just before we go, I thought I'd show you what the painting would look like within a frame. I would always recommend using a mount to allow the painting to breathe rather than having the frame hard up against the edge of the painting. In this particular case, the painting was done on a watercolour sheet of 15 by 11 inches, and so allowing a 2.5-inch mount all the way around would give you a 20 by 16 inch frame, which is what's represented here. So many thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it informative. If you do want to get in touch, my details are on the end of the video here, as well as in the text below. I do have a number of paintings for sale on Etsy. Again, the details are here on the screen. So until next time, happy painting, and hope to see you soon.